Hi, folks, and welcome back to the pole barn of bad decisions and broken dreams where the coffee's always hot. Nope, not even close to being hot. Can't keep it hot. Not sure what we're going to do, but we'll keep making questionable decisions on our coffee choices. So today we're back in the barn working on the 1966 Nova, and what we're going to do is we're going to create or fabricate a fuel system to do the break-in procedure on the straight six 230 engine. And what we're going to need to do is we've got all of our parts over here. I'll get you in here, but we need to make this temporary fuel system so that we can run the engine, and we've got plenty of fuel going in. And we're going to do that off an electrical Carter fuel pump to the original carburetor that came on the engine. So let me get you in here and show you what I'm doing. Here we have all of our parts necessary for this temporary fuel system. We've got our fuel pressure regulator that's going to regulate our fuel down to carburetor pressures. We've got our instructions for the fuel pressure regulator. That is an Aeromotive 13220 fuel pressure regulator. We've got the tab that is going to mount this to our little bracket that we made for the fuel pump itself. This is our Carter fuel pump that we're going to be using to provide fuel to the regulator. Now, what we've got to do is we need a temporary fuel tank. And what I've done is I've taken this old gas can and I've got to put some fuel lines into the gas tank or the gas can. We got to put a withdrawal line and a return line into it because the fuel pressure regulator is going to return any excess pressure back into that tank. So, get this out of the way here. So what we're doing is you can see these two spots on that fuel gas can is now this right here is JB Weld Professional and this right here is Scotch Weld 8005. And those are the two adhesives that I'm going to be that I'm actually testing to see how well that they'll adhere to this plastic that this fuel can is made out of. So we have to wait 24 hours for those adhesives to cure, and then I want to do some testing and make sure that that those either hold real well. Both adhesives are rated for plastics as well as metal. So we're going to drill holes in that. We're going to drop our fuel lines in there, return and withdrawal, and then we'll use the adhesive around the fuel line to keep that sealed up. So we can pull fuel out of the fuel tank into the carburetor and have it returned back to the fuel tank when we're running the engine, and that's going to be for 20 minutes at about 2,000 RPMs. So that's where we're at. We also have our thread sealant that we're going to be using. That's Gasola thread sealant, and this is rated for gasoline. And we also have the Permatex, let's see here, 59214 thread sealant that we can use on all of our fittings for all of our fuel lines and in our regulator. And that'll ensure that we don't have any leaks when we put that temporary fuel system to work. We've got the original single barrel carburetor that came on the 1966 Chevy Nova straight six 230 engine, and we're going to be installing that back on our engine for the break-in process. This here is that bracket that I spoke about when we were doing the gas pedal, and that bracket slides onto here and actuates everything from our, there we go, from our fuel pedal rod. So that's going to get put on here, and then that will, well, that'll go to here, right there, and that will actuate our throttle plates while we're running. We'll also have to figure out a way that we can set this carburetor up so the engine will run without someone holding on to the throttle plates or actually holding on to the throttle and keeping it open. So we want that to run by itself so we can move around, look for leaks, check our pressures, check oil pressure, check temperature, and all of that. So we're going to try and get this stuff set up. We still have to wait on that fuel tank for our adhesives to dry and do a little testing on that. And when that's done, we'll come back and tell you what's going on. So the process that I went through for testing out these two adhesives was I took some sandpaper and I roughed up a spot on that plastic fuel jug and then cleaned it off with some carburetor cleaner. I want to get a good mechanical adhesion on our fuel lines that are going to go down into this fuel tank. So we scuffed that up with some sandpaper. We applied our adhesives. We're going to wait 24 hours and figure out which one of these adhesives will hold best for holding those withdrawal and return lines in that tank so that they don't move around and we don't drag up any air or anything like that, and it's all sealed on the tank itself. Our fuel regulator is going to get installed right here on this King Starboard piece that we built to hold our fuel pump, and we've got a little bracket here, and that's going to get installed there so we can run our feed line into the fuel regulator and then out back to the return into the fuel tank, and then also out of the fuel regulator and into our carburetor. Once the regulator is installed and the fuel tank has the withdrawal and the return lines installed, we'll plumb that all up, and then we've got to go through the process of setting up this regulator for pressures that are equal to that single barrel carburetor. And what that entails is probably setting it all up on the workbench. We'll connect our fuel line to the carburetor, and then we have our adjustment tabs on top of the regulator, and we'll also be installing gauges for fuel pressure gauges in our spots on the fuel regulator so that we can adjust that and make sure that the regulator is set up for the correct pressure, which is going to be probably 4 to 5 pounds. Once that's set up and we're finished breaking in the engine, that can go and be installed to the fuel lines, where we can use the actual fuel system on the 66 Nova to provide fuel to the new carburetor that we have that's going to get installed on our new intake manifold. Once the break-in process has been achieved, we'll take this old exhaust manifold off, this intake manifold off, and we'll put the new parts on, and then we'll go through the process all over again of getting nice clean fuel to the new engine. After a scratch test and a pry test, the JB Weld has outperformed the 3M8005. So JB Weld for the win, and we're going to be using the JB Weld to adhere the withdrawal and the return lines into our fuel tank. So now we have to figure out where we're going to install the withdrawal and the return on our tank. We've got an old fuel line here from the original engine, and what we're going to do is do a little cleanup on that and get that straightened out a little bit and use that for our withdrawal. We're doing a little straightening out on our brake lines here. And what I've done is I've just taken my brake line tool and I put that in, and it's basically doing reverse of bending the lines. We just go through, give that a little kink, trying not to kink the brake line itself, and getting all the little turns and bends in here to straighten it out enough just so we can get it down inside our temporary fuel tank, and then we'll get that adhered in there, and then we'll have one withdrawal line and one return line. And we'll shorten this up a little bit. We've got to get this cleaned up here as well, so I'll take care of that and we'll be right back. We've got our brake lines all cleaned off and looking nice. Now what we have to do is we're going to take the brake line cutoff tool or the pipe cutting tool, and we're going to cut off this end. It's actually got a halfway decent nice flare on it, but I don't want this fitting on here when it's in our tank. So we got to at least cut one end off and get that fitting off. And we just get that on there and rotate that around. Of course, you have to be able to grab it. Hold on just a second here. And we got to grab just a pair of pliers here so we can grab that line and hold on to it a little bit better so we can turn that pipe cutting tool. There we go. Rotate that around. We'll cut that off. It'll take just a second here to get through this. This is kind of an easy one to do. And there, that's coming through pretty nicely. There, that's that. And our fitting is off. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull off both ends here and reflare this piece of fuel line. We'll reflare this piece of fuel line. Get a good hold on that. And do the same thing on this one. Get that end off, get that fitting off, like that. And then we're going to have to go in and probably, we got to deburr that edge as well as that edge before we can put that new bubble flare on there. And what we'll do is we'll get this fitting off of this pipe here and throw that back in, because those are good fittings and we'll be able to use those and save those for when we're doing brake lines. And what we have here is my drill and a little cutoff, or a little countersink bit, and I'm just going to stick it in there and get that burr off. And we'll sand that off a little bit, make that a nice, smooth piece there. And now we'll break out the flaring tool and put a little bubble flare on there, so when we put a hose on there and clamp it down, it's not going to slide off. And we're not dealing with high pressures, so it's not really critical. I could put a hose on here and then put 2 hose clamps on there going opposite directions, and it would probably work just fine. But we're going to put a little bubble flare on there to make a nice seal. We don't want any fuel leaks anywhere, and we'll get that taken care of. We've got our file here, and we're just going to file off the top and get any burrs off of there. And what we'll do later on is we'll spray something into this, into here. Get that popped up, get that nice and smooth. We want a nice smooth edge, so when we put that bubble on there, no sharp edges. And that one looks pretty good. We're going to take and do the same thing with this. We're going to stick the end of the file in there on this side and just rotate it around. Make sure we haven't got any nasty burrs in there. File a nice flat edge on our fuel line. And we got the second line done. So we'll get the brake line tool out and we'll put a single flare on there to hold those hoses on nice and tight. Here is my tool all set up in my vise, and show you how that works. It's a, I don't know, some guys call it a K tool. This is an HT 1600 tool that I bought off of Amazon, and there's a lot of videos on here that talk about double flaring brake lines, but no one ever really talks about the fuel lines. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use the 37-degree side of our tool, and I'm going to flare this fuel line so that we can get a good flare on it and get a hose to stay on there. We have our flaring tool here set up with a piece of 3/8 inch line on it, and like I said, I'm going to start off with a 3/8 operation 1 on a 37-degree flare on this piece of 3/8 brake line. And we're going to be using this line as not this line, but we're going to be using a 5/16 line here as the fuel line. But I wanted to show you what I'm doing on a different piece than what I'm going to put on the car, because I want to show you the 2 different flares, a 37 and a 45. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flare this side with a 37, and we're going to flare the other side with a 45 and show you the difference between the 2 flares. So I've chucked it up, I've cleaned off the edge of this fuel line and made sure that everything fits correctly, everything is tight. One thing you want to make sure of on these tools is that this piece right here of the tool, you want to make sure that that's down as far as it can go. Otherwise, you will get an uneven flare. So I've got that all set up, and I'm going to pull this out, and it goes right inside, and I'm going to give it a flare. Right there. There's our flare. We'll pull that out and get that out of the tool. And now we're going to go, and I'm going to take just a pen here, and I'm going to put a 37 on one end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the tool around to the 45-degree flare and make sure that the 45-degree flare is facing the tool. I'm going to put that back in, make sure that that fits on there real nice. Yep, it will. We'll put that in there, drop that down, rotate our tool over, lock it into place so it's there nice and tight. Make sure everything is pushed up tight. We're going to go to operation 1 on the tool. Give it just a little bit of tension on it, and we're going to move this up, and that is going to set the tool to the right spot so that this tool is all set up correctly. And I'm going to do that again real quick here. Put that on there to our operation 1, and that's tight. And then we're going to tighten the tool down so it clamps down on that line. And now we're going to go and we're going to do a 45-degree line on a 3/8 45-degree flare on the 3/8 operation 1. And we'll find that on here, 5/16, 3/8 operation 2, 3/8 operation 1. Right there. Okay. And that goes in there real nicely. So I'm going to take a little oil. I'm going to put a little more oil on our tool just to lubricate things up. And we're going to flare this end for the 45-degree. Get a flare on there. Perfect. We're going to loosen it back up. And we've got our 2 flares. So what we've got is we've got the 37-degree flare right there. And then we have the 45-degree flare. Now I'm going to take a look at those and see what I've got. And I like the 37-degree flare a little bit better. So we're going to reset our tool to 37 degrees. And make sure the 37 is facing the tool. We're going to chuck it back up. Going to go back to operation 1. Get a little bit of tension on there. And we're going to move that back, and we're going to put that on there. Get that tightened down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to operation 2 on the flaring tool. So let's get operation 2 with 5/16. Now, one thing I want to stress is that we are not doing a double flare on this. All I'm going to do is just put a little bit of tension on the tool and kind of close up that flare so we don't have any kind of a harsh edge on the end. So I'm going to take that, and all I'm going to do is give it just a little bit of little pull. So we've basically done both operations, but only a light operation on the second one. And there is the flare that's going to hold our hose clamp on. Now, I can use that flare right there, or I can use this type of flare right here. I'm thinking this one's a little bit better. I may have gone a little bit too far on that second operation. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to do a 37-degree flare, single operation with just a touch on the second operation for that. We've got our tool set up here with our 5/16 line, which is going to be our fuel line. We've got operation 1 already set so that when I pull this back, it lines up the dies and creates the correct stick out for that pipe or that fuel line. So we can do our operation 1 on the 5/16 fuel line. We've got our tool set up here for operation 1, which is basically just a flat nut on there. And I'm going to rotate that in and push that so it creates the right stick out on that fuel line. Let that go, and we're going to tighten this up real tight. Get our camera set back up here. Tighten this up so that fuel line does not move. We don't want that fuel line moving back in our tool. We're going to go to 5/16 operation 1. We're going to give it a little bit of a, and looks like I've got a slight alignment issue here. And I got to make sure that my tool is nice and flat. There we go. Now we're in, and we're going to give that a flare. And that created, if I can get that into focus there, there we go. Got a nice fuel flare on that to hold that rubber hose on. So we're still set up on our 37-degree flare. We're going to put this back in here, go back to operation 1, put our tool back together, give it just a little bit of tension. Operation 1, to align the tool, make sure that stick out is correct. Give her a tighten up, make sure it's nice and tight. We're going to go to operation 2 for the 5/16 double flare, and we're just going to kiss it just ever so slightly. And all that's going to do is that's just going to tighten up that flare a little bit so we don't have any sharp edges or anything sticking out. And we're going to try and get you to see that. And that's what that second operation did. And we've got a really nice flare. So that's going to be our temporary, this is going to be the return line for our temporary fuel tank when we're doing the break-in on the straight 6. Wanted to give you just a quick look at our flares that are on our 2 fuel lines here. We've got our withdrawal line with our flare, and we've got our return line with our flare. So the next thing we need to do is we've got our withdrawal line and our return line, our temporary fuel system, and we need to install these hoses or these fuel lines inside here. So we've got the withdrawal line, which has got a 90-degree on it. It's going to go down and it's going to sit about an inch off the bottom of that tank. Just want to make sure that we don't pick up anything that's heavy, or we'll clean this tank out, this fuel can out before we put any fuel in it. Make sure that it's nice and clean. Make sure that everything. We can hook our rubber hose up to here that comes off of our fuel pump. Same with this. We've got that as a return line that's going to go to our fuel regulator. So we'll do a little ciphering here and figure out what we're going to do and where we're going to install these to make it easiest to set that by the car and run that as a temporary fuel system. So here's my thought process here. When this is sitting next to the Nova, this will be sitting on the ground like this. We will have, get this out real quick here, we'll have our fuel regulator, and that's going to be mounted right there. So our return line is going to come out of the bottom here and go up. Just to show you kind of what I'm thinking here. You know, these are the kind of things that you run into when you do stuff like this. And again, like I said, I am not a professional at creating temporary fuel systems. I'm just using again my common sense to build something that we can use for a temporary fuel system to run this motor and break it in and get nice clean fuel into the engine so we can continue on building the 1966 Chevy Nova. So this is our withdrawal line, and I think we're going to go right down here on the top of this fuel can, and we're going to come out and it's going to sit in this orientation. Probably something like this. So that is facing our fuel pump and our regulator, which is going to be done here. And then we'll take this and we'll drop this in right here, drop it all the way down, do a 90-degree turn here facing out. So then we've got both of our fuel lines facing the same direction and going to our temporary fuel pump and fuel pump regulator. Actually, fuel pressure regulator, excuse me. I also went and slid my fuel line down into the tank, making sure that it is up against the side of the fuel can here to give it a little bit more stability. And I've lifted it up about an inch and I've marked it. So I know exactly where we need to put our JB weld to hold that in place. We're going to now take our tubing bender and put a 90-degree bend in our withdrawal fuel line so that it comes up and faces backwards towards where our pump is going to be sitting. And I don't want to bend this when it's already in here and glued down because I'm afraid that it will destabilize where we've adhered it to the fuel tank. And here we have our 90-degree bend with our tubing bender in our return line. Here's a good look at the final orientation of our two fuel lines, our return line and our withdrawal in our temporary fuel can tank. We've got our fuel can sitting outside in the sun because a little bit of heat and warmth will help kick that JB weld off a little bit faster and help it firm up a little bit. We've got all of our fittings that we want to install on the regulator here. We have to put some sealant on those and get those sealed up. We have our holes marked where our regulator is going to be installed and all of our hardware laid aside to attach that regulator to our fuel pump rack. Now I've got to go run into the house. The dogs have been inside the house, so we're going to have to take a second and let the dogs out and let them get a little outside time. right, guys, let's go outside. Hello, George Paisley. Yes, that's my good girl, George Paisley. That's my good girl. And there's Alfred Pennyworth and the Cody Barrels. Yes, let's go outside and go to potties. Here we go, buddy. Yes. Whoa. Hello, pupperheads. Hi, folks. I'm Brian Kane, and welcome back to the pole barn of bad decisions and broken dreams. Good morning. It's the next day now after working on all of the property maintenance and getting all that stuff done. I hope you enjoyed it and stuck around for the rest of the video. We're back on the 1966 Chevy Nova, working on the temporary fuel system. We'll get you in there and show you what we've done, what we have to do, and get rolling on getting that set up so we can start up the straight 6 230 with a 250 head and get that broken in. So sit back, relax, grab yourself a cup of brake fluid, continue to make those questionable decisions on your coffee choices, and enjoy the video. Just so you're aware, this is a carburetor pressure fuel pump, a carburetor pressure fuel pump, and it might not be necessary to put the pressure regulator on it, but when you guys are working on fuel injection type stuff, this is a good little video to give you some insight on how I do things and how this is going to all work together, whether it's on a carbureted application or a fuel injection application. I'm pretty sure that you've all seen holes getting drilled and things getting bolted on things, so I won't video most of this. We'll get this all taken care of, and when she's all installed and plumbed up, we'll bring you back in and show you how it looks in the end. Hi folks, Brian Kane here, and I just wanted to give you a showing of the completed temporary fuel system assembly. We moved our Carter fuel pump out. We installed our ground strap that is grounded to the fuel pump. We've got our hose to the inlet on the fuel pump. Got a filter here that is going to make sure we don't get any debris going through the pump or into our pressure regulator, which is through bolted. I built this side here and screwed it down so that we had a good, nice, solid base to mount that fuel pressure regulator. We installed all of our fittings. We put our low pressure gauge on so that can be monitored when we break in the 1966 Chevy Nova 230 straight 6 on that single barrel carburetor. And we will adjust this fuel fuel pressure regulator down to 6 to 8 pounds. And then anything excessive over that will come out of our return and go back into the temporary fuel tank. So that is the temporary fuel system. Just kind of wanted to give you a showing of how that was built, what I did. I used King starboard that I had here in the shop. And that'll just set right down on the ground, and we'll run a hose from here up to the carburetor. And then we'll connect our ground strap and our power wire to a battery. Probably not the battery that's running the engine, but it'll probably be a different battery just sitting right next to it, or a little bit of ways just to make sure there's no sparks or anything, because we are dealing with fuel and it is flammable. So our temporary fuel system is complete. We've got our Carter pump. We have our inlet coming in from our temporary tank through the pump into the pressure regulator. We've got a low pressure gauge here. Our adjustments are on top here. The outlet to the carburetor and the bypass that goes back to the temporary tank. And here's a look at the temporary tank completed. The adhesive has dried on our vent, and our withdrawal and our return here on the tank, and our return here on the tank. And here we have a look at the temporary fuel tank. We've got our return here, we've got our withdrawal here, and then we have the vent right here. And that'll get hooked up with hoses to our temporary fuel system. So that will complete the video on the temporary fuel system for the 1966 Chevy Nova to get that up and running, the straight 6.230 engine, and get that broken in. I want to thank everybody for sticking around and staying till the end of this video. I had a real good time with this little project and getting this taken care of. That gets us a little bit closer to getting that engine running. We've still got a couple of things going on here in the engine bay, but that will be in our next video. And you folks have a wonderful day, and thanks for stopping in. So if you want to see something kind of funny, that is a picture of our house and our windows on the west side of our property. And I'm going to zoom way in, and you can just barely make out Alfred sitting on the couch, staring out at the pole barn, making sure that I'm okay, and nothing's happening.